Hello, everybody. My name is Missy Perkins, and I am one of the co-founders of Paint the City, along with my partner, Barrett Keithley. Paint the City is an artist-led initiative that was formed on June 4th of this year out of a response to the COVID pandemic and the George Floyd protests. We saw that it was important to start this because as artists, we see everything as a canvas. And when we started to see the boarded up businesses and the struggle and sadness that was happening in our city, we knew that we had to make a call to action. We started immediately reaching out to local chambers of commerce, leaders, aldermen, and other collectives to help us promote messages of love, inspiration, and peace. We had an overwhelming response from both the business side and the artist side that wanted to come into these neighborhoods and help restore and beautify the struggle that had been happening. It is important for organizations like Paint the City and other initiatives that have also been creating these messages to exist in this climate. Art in public spaces has the power to transform people's minds and hearts. It has the power to influence positivity and change for the better. But most important, it has the power of giving hope and inspiration to these communities that are in need. No one knew what 2020 was going to bring today, but here we are creating life and meaning out of pain and confusion. To this day, we have managed to work with over 50 artists from all over Chicago area, and we began to see the powerful impact that their messages had on every community that we have touched. The public was able to engage with us and our artists, and we were able to create open dialogues around our form of what we considered a visual protest. We are continuing to spread these messages, and we won't stop until we can continue to engage the community because we feel the ongoing messages need to go. I encourage everybody to come up and take a look at the QR codes that are next to each of the art pieces to get a closer look at some of the artists' work. We are thrilled to share these messages throughout our city, and at this moment, I would like to introduce one of our artists and the other co-founder, Barrett Keithley.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing today? Beautiful day, right? My name is Barrett Keithley, co-founder of Paint the City. I'm glad to be here to showcase all of the wonderful talent that we have here and be a fellow artist and creating platforms for my other fellow artists to be showcased. I believe that each citizen has responsibility to engage in growth and development of their city. The artists, as you can see, took their time to spread messages of peace, love, and hope and unity for our city. And it's clear to see that we are the 773 and the 312. Growing up in Chicago, on the city's south side, Morgan Park neighborhood, Wild Hundreds, if you will, I recognize the importance of celebrating all the people that I came across. In America, Chicago is one of its biggest melting pots. We must honor that diversity. And much like the artists that are on these boards, we represent that diversity. When there's a baby shot on the south side or west side of Chicago, that rage and anger should be felt in all of Chicago. When our homeless, when our vulnerable are being victimized, then that's a disrespect to our strong as well. And as a city, we must own that because it's ours to own. And much like our mayor, we Chicagoans do not take heed to disrespect. That's why these artists came together, because they recognize that they are agents of change and want to be empowered and to care for one another. And that's how, little by little, we right the wrongs that we face. The work against racial oppression did not begin with us, but please let this generation be the last one to encounter it. Let our children grow up never having to face it. Let them be so remiss by it that if it does happen on off chance, they don't understand it. Let us be that generation that pushes that forward, because we can be and we ought to be. Let us work to achieve all the injustices. Let us work to achieve the eradication of all the injustices. Today, tomorrow, and the next, let us manifest the dreams that our ancestors and forefathers had, that every race, color, sex, or creed is created equal. Let us, citizens of Chicago, lead that way. And let us support our mayor in leading that way. And it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce our leader and mayor of Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
It's always a pleasure to hear someone speak their truth. So thank you both for your kind and, I think, powerful words. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on the South Side at DeSable Museum. And let's give another round of applause to Barrett and to Missy from Paint the City for their incredible work. And thanks to Sounding Boards and to many other artists joining us today who have lent their talent and their voices to the boards of change. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues from the City Council who are here, including Chairman Rebollos for his leadership on the census, Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, as well as Alderman David Moore. We also need to give a big thanks to FCB Global, who played a big part in getting this project off the ground and bringing it to life. And finally, I want to thank the president of DeSable Museum, Perry Ermer, for hosting us and for her passionate commitment to our city and keeping the stories of our communities relevant and alive. Thank you, Perry. As we heard from Missy and Barrett, this moment is about bringing change. But it's really ignited 2 months ago when we all watched the horrific video of the murder by Minneapolis police officers of George Floyd, evoking trauma and righteous outrage across our city and our country. Here in Chicago, the murder of George Floyd triggered memories of Laquan McDonald, of Rekia Boyd, of Quintonio LeGrier, and so many others. And ongoing racial violence and racial injustice stretches back as far as at least a century ago to the Red Summer of 1919. That pain and righteous anger over George Floyd's murder and the death of too many other Black and brown victims brought thousands into our city streets in a mass call for change. Change that would bring respect and dignity and freedom to Black Americans, and the end to institutional racism and the stopping of victimizing of people who have been subjected to the same racist system of inequality and injustice. Those thousands gave purpose to their pain through the power of nonviolent protest towards social change. However, unfortunately and tragically, a subset of vigilantes have attempted over and over again to hijack those peaceful protests for their own selfish and criminal gain. I've said many times, and I will say it here again today, I will always support and uplift what's right. And yes, I'm channeling my mother, Ann Lightfoot, who always said to me, "You're my child and I love you, but when you're wrong, I'm going to tell you." And so while I will always support and uplift what's right, I will also strongly condemn what's wrong. And the violence and destruction we witnessed against our neighbors, our neighborhoods, and our values was unequivocally wrong. Our residents deserve to be safe. Our businesses and property deserve to be safe. And our police officers deserve to be safe. Out of that dark time grew many glimmers of light, beacons that turned the blighted into beauty. Many of our city's buildings and storefronts began putting up boards like these. They were jarring at first, blank canvases, but it wasn't long before they began to transform from symbols of pain into a canvas for change, filled with artwork, messages, and voices of our communities. They became acts of protest to uplift in their own right, because they were themselves symbols of rights for others. They were acts of protest because, like protests, they served to lift voices and prick our consciousness against racial and economic inequality and injustice. But they also stood as symbols of our power and our aspiration and our necessity to be better. They speak to this moment and the reality of the power of the artists in our community to really mirror and push us to be our better selves. Now, there will be some who see me standing here today before these powerful and beautiful works of art who will be appalled and believe that I, the mayor, have given over my power to criminals, to terrorists, pandering in this moment of unrest. Still others will think that my presence signifies nothing than the moment, because the moment is so much bigger than mere paint on a board. To both groups, I say, fear not. Release your anger and think about the opportunities that this moment presents to all of us to rethink our notions of community, of fairness, of what it means to be each other's neighbors, or as Gwendolyn Brooks said, to be each other's business. I see one of my key responsibilities as mayor in this moment to listen, but also to remind us of all that binds us together. We are not warring factions, and we will not survive if we retreat to our neutral corners. We will only survive. We will only move forward and use this moment to transform our city and the notion of what it means to be a Chicagoan if we find the common thread that binds us together. Because it's only together that we will move forward as a better, greater, and more fairer city than we ever have been before. That destiny is within our grasp if we use this moment as an opportunity to find common ground and come together. This week, our nation is celebrating the life of one of the embodiments of our power to be better, Representative John Lewis. Good trouble, John Lewis. Necessary trouble, John Lewis. The man who advanced our democracy by engaging directly through sit-ins, freedom rides, protest, who always knew that advancing our democracy demanded more than a change in our beliefs, but taking that energy and changing it into engagement all across our nation and in every forum that represents democracy. In our courts, in our legislation, in our public dialogue, in our public institutions, and in our ballot boxes, all of which John Lewis helped to make possible for Black and brown Americans. We talk a lot about democracy in our country, and even in this fraught and fractured moment, the power of democracy is still real. a power that transforms lives for the better, but only if we embrace one of its key tenets, and that's equality for all. In talking about democracy, we have to remember that rather than being an end in itself, it is in fact a means to something greater. It is in a sense, an argument that says the best means to enabling our society's success is by providing all of its members an equal opportunity to unlock their own individual God-given talent through their hard work. But that first argument is dependent upon a second that is even deeper and more profound, and that is a belief in universal equality. That we, the people, are all created equal in God's sight. And in being created equal, we are endowed with the same unalienable rights as equals. Here in our country, that's meant the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, as we've heard intoned so many times before. And even though 200 plus years in, we've obviously failed in fulfilling that ideal throughout our history, the power and promise in the nation's enduring experiment with democracy is nonetheless still rooted in that revolutionary ideal. An ideal that entails the right to be heard and the right to be counted and respecting the rights of others to do the same. Democracy at its core represents our shared acknowledgement of our shared humanity. In doing so, it follows that a true democracy must also be, by definition, a full democracy, and that denying those rights to any part of our society not only denies the fullness of democracy, but rejects our shared humanity and makes us the lesser for it. But democracy's argument demands something from us as well, and that, my friends, is engagement. Engagement with our public institutions, engagement with our elected officials, with the public dialogue, with the facts, with reality. And above all else, engagement with each other. Passionate, robust engagement with each other, but respectful engagement. I'm saying all of this because we are meeting at a moment when our democracy is under siege from multiple directions. To those who think I'm referring to President Trump and his brazen corruption and attack on our institutions, I'll save you this suspense. I am. But the siege that I'm speaking about is more than just about him. It's more than just about one man, even though he is absolutely very much a symptom of the cause. Our democracy is under siege because we are losing the respectful engagement democracy demands in alarming ways. This includes losing confidence in our small d democratic institutions. Too many people feel their government isn't engaged with them, that government doesn't work for them and doesn't respond to their daily struggles, so they in turn find other outlets for engagement. And I will say, as an elected leader, I understand that concern, and we must do better to make sure that in everything that we do in government, that we are reflecting the lived experience of our residents every single day. They must have confidence that we hear them. This sense of disengagement, that a government isn't responsive, spurred the revolution that forged our nation over 2 centuries ago. Earlier this month, we marked the 244th anniversary of our Declaration of Independence. And a few moments ago, I alluded to the part that we all know, which is the preamble that begins with the second paragraph. We hold these truths to be self-evident. But the part that has special resonance today is the other part of the Declaration, the part that we all forget, which is the litany of grievances against King George III. In reading that part, you get a sense of disaffection and disconnection of people from their government. of a people who felt that their voices weren't heard and weren't being fully counted. But our democracy isn't under siege just because of these issues. It's under siege because of the disengagement that we feel one from another. We are no longer engaging with each other in a democratic way. And that, I think, is something that should be an alarm, a challenge, but also an opportunity for all of us. Democracy requires us to engage in the public square, where we can debate and find the facts and arguments to persuade. It requires us to build coalitions and find common ground. What democratic engagement doesn't mean is who screams the loudest. It doesn't mean issuing a set of demands and then villainizing anyone who doesn't immediately pledge allegiance to your particular manifesto. If democracy fundamentally represents our shared acknowledgement of our shared humanity, then our democracy will utterly fail if we cease to see that humanity in each other. Our democracy is under siege because our public increasingly conflates community engagement with social media snark. When we limit our means of public engagement and public dialogue to a mere 140 characters, behind anonymous monikers, or on some other forms of social media, we deepen the divides. We burn the bridges that will lead us to solutions. We'll get what we've seen if we continue down this path. Conspiracy theories, targeted misinformation campaigns, and in some instances, pure hatred. Folks, our children are watching. What they need to see is that there's no substitute for direct engagement and actually having a conversation and understanding another point of view, and of course, tolerating dissonance and difference. Make no mistake, this toxic environment is fomented by extremes on the right and the left, neither which leave room for compromise. And compromise is one of the pillars of our democracy. Compromise is not a dirty word. Compromise is not complicity or capitulation. Compromise, for the 244 years of this experiment in democracy, is the most important tool that we have to find common ground and get to solutions that advance all of our interests together. We always need to fight passionately for what we believe in, but we need to do so in ways that build bridges, to allow people we disagree with to cross over to us and us to them. It's those bridges that we need to build on, and it's that spirit that finds us here and now and brings us to unveil these beautiful boards of change. When we think about the most powerful levers of our democracy, we think of the vote, free speech, organizing, and equal protection under law. And this year, in this important moment, we also have a unique opportunity to have our voices heard collectively through the census. If you don't fill it out, you get left out. If you are not counted, you give your power, you give your voice away to someone else. That's because democracy at its core is about more than just being heard. It's about being counted and continuing to be counted in any way we can. For us to be represented, you need to be counted. For us to receive our rightful share of federal funding, you need to be counted. Over the past few months, we've done everything under the sun to make sure that that happens. And these boards represent voices in communities who for too long have been undercounted and or not counted at all. Over the coming weeks, we'll be taking them across our neighborhoods to raise awareness and inspire democracy, inspire people to act, and inspire people to be counted. And the census is only the start. This simultaneous opportunity to engage in our democracy through the census and later through the vote in a presidential cycle only happens every 10 years. That's why, as we move forward, these boards will become tools to inspire change through the power of the vote. Just as we'll be doing with the census, we'll be having teams on the ground and in our communities helping folks register to vote and go to the polls. And I can't emphasize enough, take advantage of the opportunity to vote by mail. Just as John Lewis did 50 years ago and continued to do throughout his life. What events of the past few months have revealed is that while we may have come far from where we started, we still have far to go on this incredible journey in democracy. But this moment now, as fraught as it is also an opportunity for us to channel this energy into constructive, lasting democratic engagement. And I hope you all will take advantage of this moment. These signs, this message in this moment calls upon us to fully account for ourselves as participants in our democracy and our shared work in unlocking the full power and potential that this moment gives us. I'm incredibly proud to be joining you here on the South Side at DeSable Museum and in these efforts of a lifetime. Thank you all. Thank you much for being here, and be safe. All right, poll reporter. Could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning, Mayor. Today I will start by being Esther Kang at WBEZ with an on-topic question related to census. Mayor, with census response rates already low among immigrant populations, what specific actions will the city take to ensure that undocumented immigrants fill out the census despite President Trump's recent memo to exclude them from the appropriate count?
Well, first of all, he can't exclude them. And any attempt to do so, we will take him to court, and he will lose like he has before. But we are concerned about the undercount, and we've been concerned about that really since we kicked off our campaign over a year ago. Obviously, our efforts have been impacted by stay-at-home orders and COVID-19, but we are more determined than ever to make sure that we use these last few months to really get the word out in multiple languages, using trusted community members to make sure that their neighbors are counted, and we're going to continue that work.
Great. We have several questions about Wisconsin and the travel order. We're going to kick it off with a question from Craig Dillamore asking, since the city is close to enforcement action on existing travel order, have any tickets been issued yet?
I believe that there have been some, but we can get you the specific information. Our goal, obviously, is not to penalize people, but to get them to educate them into compliance, and that's what we're going to continue to do vigorously, particularly with Wisconsin that was added to the list. We've been working with a number of different stakeholders, including employers who have employees that commute back and forth from Wisconsin to the city. So we're going to continue to work with them to make sure that they are doing everything they can to keep people safe. We are concerned about an uptick in cases. We're seeing that primarily right now. It's still in the 18 to 29-year-old category. So we've got to remain diligent so that we don't become like other areas of the country.
A couple more questions on Wisconsin from Alex Fisher at NBC. Mayor, we're getting close to that 400 number.
No, we're not. We're not getting close to 400. I don't want to spread that misinformation. Our daily average is still in the 200s. It's higher than we'd like, but we're not close to 400.
Perfect. With some Illinois cities seeing dramatic rises in cases, is Chicago considering a quarantine requirement for other locations within the state of Illinois as part of your travel order?
No, we're going to continue working with the governor and his team, as well as IDPH, to make sure that we are providing supports for residents here, and we can continue to educate everyone into compliance.
Many in Wisconsin say the travel order doesn't mean much since there isn't much enforcement. What do you have to say to those people, and are you considering stronger enforcement like some East Coast states have started?
No, I do think it means a lot. I mean, we looked at, before we embarked on this path, we looked at what was done in East Coast states that really initiated this quarantining. And I think people of goodwill understand it and are adjusting their travel schedules accordingly. Or if they travel to one of the states that's on the list, then they self-quarantine for 14 days. So I think there is compliance. This isn't about penalizing people, arresting them, and giving them tickets. It's about educating members of the public so that people can have the tools that they need to keep themselves safe.
Question from Kelly Bauer at Block Club. There's about a month left to meet the 90-day deadline you set to impose certain police reform. What is the progress on those reforms?
Well, this is something that we are working on diligently, and we will announce the specific steps that were taken in order to comply with the 90 days.
Question from Amy Jacobson. There are a number of young teens, juniors, and seniors at CPS who are attending protests that sometimes turn violent. Are you concerned that if there's no in-person learning, these protests, particularly the ones outside of your house, may continue into the fall?
Well, I think people have a right to protest about anything that they want. Peaceful protest is something that we have a long history and tradition of here in Chicago. I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is protests being hijacked by people who are intent on violence, and that we're not going to tolerate. As I said in my remarks, our residents deserve to be safe, our businesses and their property deserve to be safe, and our police officers deserve to be safe.
Last question from the AP. Mayor, there were no big crowds around Wrigleyville during the first homestand, but how big of a concern are crowds building up around the ballpark for home baseball games, and how closely are you watching the situation?
Well, we were concerned about that when we realized that baseball was coming back, and we've been working diligently with the teams and the ownership and area businesses to make sure that we don't see big crowds. And I think the absence of those big crowds, particularly in Wrigleyville, is a result of that collaboration and communication ahead of time, and we've got to continue to be diligent. We want people to enjoy baseball being back. I certainly do, but we want to make sure that people are enjoying it in a safe manner.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.